Classic German brewery, classic German style. What could possibly go wrong? Hello and welcome back to the channel, and yes, today I'm taking a look at this from Ayinger. It is their Kellerbier, and it is one of the most old school traditional German lager styles in the world. What does it mean? Well, simply Kellerbier means cellar beer, and in effect it is just an old school lagering process, making the beer, chucking it down in the cellar of the ale house, beer house, whatever the right term is for Germany, you get the idea. They're pubs, effectively, and letting it mature there in the cold of the cellar. As a result, it is much more rustic than a modern lager. It has much more yeast kind of held in suspension in the beer. As a result, is naturally quite hazy, and well, it's just an art back to how things used to be. This one in particular, though, as I said, is from Ayinger. They are possibly my favourite German brewer, or at least my favourite German brewer where I can get a decent selection of their offerings relatively easily. And yeah, I think it's one, especially, Oktoberfest has just been, they get a little bit left out because they're not one of the big Munich brewers, but that doesn't mean they're not any good. They are genuinely one of my favourites. This Kellerbier comes in at 4.9%, so about as generic a lager ABV as it gets across the world, really. 4 to 5.5%, I think globally is pretty much the norm for a regular everyday lager, and this is no exception. The bottle itself, well, it looks like every other Ayinger bottle, with that little nice illustration of the brewery in the town there in the middle. Info on the back, all in German, because of course this is an export, or sorry, should I say an imported bottle from Germany. But yeah, it looks the business. One thing that is interesting though, just before we crack this open, normally German brewers are pretty confident in the shelf life of their products. They're at least a year most of the time. And this one was bottled on the 8th of May this year, 2024, and goes past its best before on the 8th of March next year. So that's, yeah, just 10 months rather than the usual minimum of 12. Whether that's because it is kind of bottle conditioned and there is more live yeast in it, I'm guessing that's a good reason to do so. But yeah, just an interesting observation. So expecting this to be pretty hazy, pretty pale, just a generic lager but with a bit more rustic fizz to it, if you know what I mean. Well, certainly looking that way. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, can we just observe how good that looks as just, yeah, an everyday lager from a bottle, home poured. I am renowned for not being the most, shall we say, sophisticated pourer of beer in the world, and well, that looks like an absolutely cracking pint. Giving it a bit more observation though, nice amount of carbonation fizzing up from the sides. If I give you a close-up, you should probably be able to see what I mean. It's fizzy, but it's not overwhelmed. I think it's holding on to some of that carbonation, which should give us a decent mouthfeel. The head on it looks spectacular. It's absolutely bright white, kind of lemon sherbety colour, slightly hazy as we would expect. I was expecting more haze, to be honest, but that's not a complaint. The bottle itself has got quite a bit of yeast stuck to the bottom, but I couldn't find anything to say that you were meant to kind of shake it around and aggravate it like you are a Weiss beer, so I just poured it straight up as it was. But yeah, looks pretty decent to me. So, aroma time. There is something about sticking your nose over a properly decent, no-nonsense German lager that brings just pure joy. It's got that big malt sweetness, it's got that nice grassy, slightly, I always want to say pine, but it's not like pine from the US hops, like that's big brass kind of, that's almost kind of pine tar, pine sap. This is more like pine leaves, pine needles, freshness, more, yeah, meadow and foresty aromatics. It really is absolutely fantastic. But in this one, there is just a little bit. And I'll be honest, it's really hard to work out what flavour it's imparting. There's a tiny bit of funk from the additional yeast that's left over in this beer, and it's not giving that normal kind of banana foam sweet cum bubblegum thing that you get in Belgian ales and Weiss beers. It's more, this is going to sound bad, but the way it comes across isn't, is, you know how like a shed might smell? Like, I don't mean like a horrible, grotty, damp shed. I mean like, you put up a new shed, and just as it loses that proper, fresh kind of wood character, you get something that's just a bit more natural materials, but not distinctly one thing vibe. And well, that is really what it's giving me. It's not something that you would necessarily, class as a good thing if it was highly dominant, but just this undertone of something slightly, well, I guess it is slightly fusty, but not enough to really put you off, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's give it a go, shall we? Cheers. Okay, now I have had a Kellerbier before, but only one from one brewery that wasn't Ayinger, and theirs was good. In fact, it was Hackashaw. It was their Kellerbier, and it was nice. It was genuinely very nice indeed. This though has more gravitas. It feels bigger. And let's be honest, normally when you say 4.9% lager, that feels like as run-of-the-mill a beer that you're ever gonna get. But it isn't. It really isn't. It starts off as this nice, just very fresh, slightly sweet lager, like almost everyone you've had before, but you can tell it's a good one. And by the end, it slaps you round kind of the back of your cheeks, you know, where you get that kind of little bitter sour pinch point thing. And it's not massively bitter, it's not massively sour, it's just got this tang. It's this nice blend of the two that makes you go, ooh, that has some serious character. Now, to be honest, I don't really feel like I'm doing the explanation of this justice, so top to bottom taste test time to try and work out what exactly is going on. Right on the tip of the tongue. Nice, sweet malt. It's more sweet than it is grainy. It's very much simplistic grain sugars, but it's very nice, very enjoyable. Along with that, a good helping of proper soft grassy hop note. It feels good, it feels pleasant, and that really is about all that's there. Over the mid palate, malt really comes in at this point. That's the bit that I'm looking for in any German lager, the bit that lets me know they didn't mess around with the core ingredients. It is proper bready here, but it's light, it's crisp, it's almost like an artisanal breadstick kind of bready malt going on there. And yeah, it sits there on its own across the mid palate, and ultimately, if any beer does that, for me personally, it almost doesn't matter what happens before or after it, because that bit alone is so incredibly enjoyable. Then though, the back of the tongue. Hops come back in with the grassy, a bit more of that richer, say, kind of pine needle forestry experience. There's another note in there as well. It's not fruity, it's not citrusy, it's the closest thing that it reminded me of is if you've ever had a Scottish heather ale, it's basically where they just put bits of heather in the beer. It brings this own character, and it's not quite fruity, and it's not quite grassy, and it's distinctly vegetal, but it's not herbal. It's not quite like anything else, and well, it's got a little bit of that kind of character to it. But hello, it is very, very nice, and it's not quite the same, but it's the closest kind of relationship I can pull. And then on the aftertaste, it all switches up just a little bit. It's zingy, funky, that yeast is kicking around, it's a little bit sherbety, a few citrusy notes come in, it's very sharp, it's very clean, tickles the back of your taste buds a little bit, and you're left with this drying, well, it's quite difficult to explain. The remaining flavours, the remnant tones, are that nice sweet malt and the kind of grassy and generally, you know, kind of natural flavoured hops that are in there. But the experience is like you've just eaten a lemon sorbet, but without the flavour of the lemon. Like, it's an absolute palate cleanser. I had read about this beer that is recommended to be eaten with large meatballs and mashed potato, which is the nichest recommendation I think I've ever seen for a beer in terms of a food pairing, but I kind of get it. Like, it is a proper palate cleanser. You know, for years people have been trying to find the right beer to put with their food. The Italians do a good job of it, as do, you know, the Indian subcontinent and so on, and they're all good with their relative foods. But I can't help but think this might be just as good, if not better, than any other beer previously found for almost any food pairing, because it's neutral, it's inoffensive, but its palate cleansing abilities are just, well, above and beyond. And despite it being that intensely washing away of anything else, weirdly, it's not abrasive or difficult to get into. Like, I could genuinely drink quite a lot of this. Now, this isn't even the first German beer in the last few weeks I've said might be the best pairing for food I've ever tasted. There was that Augustiner Weiss beer I said was such a good palate cleanser, and it was kind of along the same line. So the bit about that kind of was so good is the same in this. The bit that made me question about even saying it at all, although I ultimately decided on doing so, was that most people won't feel like a Weiss beer is a good food accompaniment. There's just a bit of a mental block because my Weiss beers are so big and rich and just, yeah, I don't know, they could probably feel like it might take over. This, though, would probably be an easier access point for some people. And yeah, I'd have to stick them side by side to work out which one really was preferable. But yeah, either way, another excellent food pairing option. But to be honest, I think that really is all I've got to say about it. Have you tried this Kellerbier or that Augustiner Weiss beer, or both of them? Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you think these are like this new, I say new, this is a very trad style, but this kind of awakening of new options to pair with food? So often we go into a restaurant and get greeted with the same generic stuff because, well, they are good with food, but maybe they didn't consider there might be something out there just a little bit better. And if you're not eating with it, don't worry, because, well, it's just a brilliantly refreshing lager that has a load more character and a load more depth than all of the others, but won't leave you with some kind of big, thick, heavy aftertaste like some of the bolder German lagers do. So yeah, it's pretty much a win all round. But that is everything. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you'll be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.